Militarily, Pakistan is shocked. India was able to, with precision, decimate the terror headquarters and training camps. When Pakistan responded, India was able to blunt their response. Pakistan went running to try to achieve a ceasefire, like a scared dog with its tail between its legs.
What is your initial assessment to the entire conflict that has played out in the subcontinent, starting from the Pahalgam attack, devastating Pahalgam attack, and thereafter India took some diplomatic action, followed up by the military action on the terror camps in Pakistan and POK, and Pakistan retaliation and airstrikes on 10th of May, followed by ceasefire. What is your initial assessment on this entire conflict that played out?
Look, this wasn't a conflict which India wanted. This was a conflict that was foisted upon India. Every country has the right to defend its citizenry. It doesn't differentiate between whether a formal army attacks the country or whether a terrorist army attacks the country. But ultimately, it's the job of India to draw a red line and say, no, we will never tolerate terrorist attacks coming across our border. So India did what was absolutely necessary.
So how do you see, was India able to achieve what it wanted to convey, or and how do you see the airstrikes on 7th of October? They were very precise. And was India able to convey to Pakistan that it cannot continue its policy supporting terrorists?
Well, India won this, both diplomatically and militarily. The reason why India won diplomatically is all attention is now on Pakistan's terror sponsorship. The fact that Pakistani officers in uniform attended the funeral of terrorists shows that there is no differentiation between a terrorist and a member of the ISI or the Pakistani armed forces. Basically, the world is going to demand that Pakistan extract the rot from its own system. So diplomatically, India changed the conversation. Militarily, Pakistan is shocked. Look, I'm a historian by training, and that means I get paid to predict the past. And one thing that we can say with certainty is that Pakistan has started every single war with India and yet convinced itself that somehow it has won. It's going to be very difficult for Pakistanis to convince themselves that they won this 4-day war. The reason is India was able to, with precision, decimate the terror headquarters and training camps. When Pakistan responded, India was able to blunt their response. And then when Pakistan continued to try to retaliate, India was able to put their airfields out of commission. Pakistan went running to try to achieve a ceasefire, like a scared dog with its tail between its legs. And the fact of the matter is, there is absolutely no spin that the Pakistani military can put on what occurred to shield themselves from the full reality of the fact that they not only lost, but they lost very, very badly. The question now, however, is what Pakistan will do next. Clearly, there is a problem within the Pakistani military, both because it's a cancer on Pakistani society and because, as a military, it's incompetent. And so, is Asim Munir going to keep his job? Is the ego of Pakistani generals going to trump the future strength and well-being of all of Pakistani society? Basically, Pakistan needs to clean house. but it's an open question whether they are too far gone to do that.
Mr. Rubin, what do you think made US come and broker up what they say as they have brokered a ceasefire? What made US intervene in this conflict? Because initially they were saying that we want peace, but we are not going to intervene. What made? Was it the nuclear bluff played by Pakistan? Because they keep on telling that we have nuclear weapons and we are not keeping them just for show. We can use them. Was it a nuclear bluff that made US react into this situation?
There are two elements to the US reaction that we need to differentiate. What the United States actually did versus what President Donald Trump said. The two are not necessarily synonymous. Certainly, whenever Pakistan and India come into conflict, the United States tries to mediate behind the scenes. And this is reasonable because the United States is trying diplomatically to provide an off-ramp to prevent unrestricted warfare and also, in a worst-case scenario, prevent an escalation to any sort of nuclear exchange. So the fact that the United States would be in touch with both New Delhi and Islamabad is obvious. And the fact that both New Delhi and Islamabad would use Washington to pass messages is also obvious. Now, theoretically, both countries could also work through Moscow. But Moscow right now is busy with Ukraine. They don't have the focus. And there's also Beijing. But while Pakistan has good relations with Beijing, I mean, Pakistan is basically a colony of Beijing right now. Neither India nor the United States, for that matter, do. And therefore, Beijing cannot be a responsible mediator. So in this case, we mediated. Now, that's different from what Donald Trump said. Donald Trump likes to claim credit for everything. If you ask Donald Trump, he single-handedly won the World Cup. He invented the internet. He cured cancer. The fact of the matter is, Indians should be more like Americans in this regard and not take Donald Trump literally. The man is a braggart and a blowhard. But behind that bravado, what he's signaling is the United States was helping mediate. Where I think Donald Trump made a very bad mistake, however, by suggesting that he would use trade to compel a ceasefire. He is signaling to Indian in the government or in the opposition that India can no longer trust the American defense industry. For all the discussion last February of allowing India to join the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program, Indians would have to be crazy right now to actually purchase the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, because what Donald Trump was signaling is that we could disrupt the supply chain when India needs these aircraft most. In other words, Prime Minister Modi should not make the same mistake that the Shah of Iran made prior to the Islamic Revolution. If you recall, the Shah of Iran had purchased billions of dollars worth of American F-14s, which in the 1970s were the top-notch fighter jet in the world. And then, when the Islamic Revolution happened, of course, we didn't provide the F-14s to the Islamic Republic of Iran. And this has become a diplomatic bone of contention ever since. Now, we're not talking about anything like the Islamic Revolution in India, of course. But this parallel should be front and center in the Indian consciousness. What happens if the United States doesn't fulfill its contracts? I mean, the irony here in wanting to sell India the F-35s was the United States diplomatically and militarily was taking advantage of the fact that Russia defaulted on its contracts with India because Russia needed its spare parts, its ammunition, and its aircraft engines for Russia's own war with Ukraine. Now, Donald Trump, basically because he likes to talk off the cuff and he puts his own interests above those of traditional diplomacy, has completely undercut the American defense industry and the American defense relationship with India. That I see as the greatest ramification of Donald Trump and his loose lips.
So, Mr. Rubin, when India attacked Pakistan terror camps in Pakistan, we were clear that were these were the attacks on Pakistan terror camps. Kashmir was nowhere in the conversation, though the attack took place in Kashmir only. How do you see from bringing in Kashmir and talking about the mediation on the issue of Kashmir? Though India has always been reluctant to bring in third party, it says India and Pakistan will discuss among themselves if there will be any discussion on Kashmir. How it is going to impact the tie between India and US going forward?
Well, first of all, India should not negotiate over Kashmir. The situation in Kashmir is simple. Pakistan invaded Kashmir illegally and has occupied a portion of Kashmir ever since. Frankly, the same is true with regard to China and Aksai Chin. Now, there can be no negotiating a black and white issue. The United States may be reacting diplomatically, but India should not allow the United States to go down this path because it rewards terrorism. I mean, not by every reading of international law, Pakistan occupies Kashmir, period. So the issue here, and the only issue up for discussion, should be compensation to India for decades of terror sponsored by Pakistan across its border into Jammu and Kashmir, and increasingly with regard to Punjab and the Khalistan issue as well.
Mr. Rubin, how do you see the airstrikes of that took place on 10th of May by India? Were there is sort of India has put out so many evidence into public. They have shared satellite images. According to you, was India able to give a big blow to Pakistan military capability during these airstrikes?
Yes, I mean, what I can think of two. Yeah, the short answer is yes. India taught Pakistan a lesson which it should not forget for decades. India taught Pakistan a lesson that if the Pakistanis have any self-respect, should end with Asim Munir in prison, if not on the gallows. I can think of two recent parallels that India should have in mind with regard to what happened in Pakistan. One is the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and the second is the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict in 2020. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Russia was surprised by Ukraine's resistance and capabilities. Russia thought they could conquer Ukraine in 2 weeks, and they're still fighting more than 3 years later. The issue with Russia is that it has not come to terms with why its military has fared so poorly. Russia has not come to terms with the fact that its own military's corruption led to a disastrous result. Now, the opposite has been true in Armenia. When Azerbaijan invaded Armenia in Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, the Armenian military didn't do well. And today, the defense ministry, today, the defense minister of Armenia from 2020 is in prison because of alleged corruption that undermined Armenia's ability to defend itself and its interests. So the question for Asim Munir and the Pakistani military right now is, are they going to believe, one, two, three. The question for the Pakistani military right now is, are they going to behave more like Russia and believe that they can put a Band-Aid on a sucking chest wound and that everything will be okay? Or are they going to be more like democratic Armenia, realize they lost, and address how to repair their military in a very logical and open way?
Mr. Rubin, do you think international community has failed to hold Pakistan accountable for its deeds when it comes to supporting terrorism? We have seen during the current conflict, it was very clear the Pakistani terrorists came into Kashmir and attacked innocent tourists. Previously, we have also seen during 2008 Mumbai terror attack, and not only in India but around the world, how Pakistan terrorists trained in Pakistan inflict uh, inflict injuries and kill people around the world. So, do you think international community has failed to hold Pakistan accountable, given IMF just during the conflict only Pakistan was able to secure the second tranche of its loan of USD 1 billion. How do you see this development?
Well, look, it's simple. The international community has failed to hold Pakistan to account, and the international community has no excuse. After Pakistan lost Bangladesh in 1971, the ISI recognized that Pakistan was such an artificial state that it could collapse at any moment because all of Pakistan's constituent ethnicities wanted nothing to do with the rule of Pakistan's central government and the domination of the Punjabis in Pakistan. And so they decided to fan the flames of radical Islam in the false hope that that radical Islamist identity would trump any sort of indigenous culture or ethnic identity. And this is why, for more than 54 years, Pakistan has unabashedly sponsored terrorism against India, against Afghanistan, and against many other countries as well. Now, if we just want to look at the last few weeks, the fact that the International Monetary Fund did not suspend funding, $1 billion in funding for Pakistan, shows that the International Monetary Fund and the communities, the countries which contribute to it, is not serious about Pakistan. I mean, this isn't the first loan to Pakistan. This is the 25th loan to Pakistan. And Pakistan had just received a loan of $1.3 billion last March as well. I would say that if Pakistan is not designated by a state as a state sponsor of terror in the United States, that's a sign that the United States does not take Pakistani terrorism seriously. I would say that if every European country does not designate Pakistan as a state sponsor of terror, it's a sign that the European Union does not take Pakistan's terrorism or any terrorism seriously. The same thing is true with the United Kingdom. There can be no equivalence here. The fact of the matter is, the United Kingdom needs to designate Pakistan as a state sponsor of terror. The goal isn't to punish Pakistan. The goal is to reform Pakistan. Because until Pakistan is at peace with itself and its neighbors, until it eschews all terrorism, then there will be no peace in the region. I would go further, however. Turkey provided drones to Pakistan. Those drones didn't do Pakistan much good, but I would suggest that that drone delivery to Pakistan should also make Turkey liable to be formally designated to be a state sponsor of terror. Look, it's not rocket science, nor is Turkey's support for Pakistani terrorism the first time Turkey has supported terrorism. The fact of the matter is, Turkey is there's hardly a Islamist terrorist group Turkey has not recently supported. From Boko Haram in Nigeria to Hamas in Palestine. And now we have the Islamic State in Syria, as well as any number of Pakistani terror groups that are supposedly fighting on behalf of Kashmiris, but in reality only kill Kashmiris.
Mr. Rubin, how do you see China's involvement in this conflict? Indian forces have provided evidence where Chinese ammunition was used during this short but substantial conflict. How do you see? Do you mention about Turkey's involvement into this? How do you see China's involvement?
Look, I mean, China is basically showing itself that it is in a war with India, whether it wants to acknowledge that or not. It's a gray zone war, and it's a war by proxy. And Pakistan is acting as Beijing's puppet. But this just shows where Beijing is diplomatically. What matters is not what China says, it's what China actually does. And so India, as far as I'm concerned, should respond in kind. It should embrace Tibet even more than it already does. And of course, there's a danger looming that China is trying to artificially hijack international Buddhist organizations ahead of the selection eventually of a new Dalai Lama. India, I think, should have much more open and productive relations with Taiwan as well. But let's also face it, China is afraid for another reason. India right now, of course, is the most populous country in the world. It has surpassed China. But because of China's 36 years of a one-child policy, even though it's ended, it has sent China off a demographic cliff. By the end of the century, India is going to have hundreds of millions of more people than China. China may only have 650 million people when the 21st century ends. Now, here's the rub. I've been to the China-India border, and every Indian soldier I talked to had 2 or 3 brothers. When I looked across the border, every Chinese soldier there was an only child. China is the only country in the world that has an entire army made up of only children. And it knows that as its population declines, this will be a military disaster for it. China likes to bluster about its military power, but China has only won one war over the last 50 years. And that was, 1, 2, 3. China has only fought one war over the last 50 years. That was in 1979 against Vietnam, and China lost. India has fought one war in the last week against Chinese equipment and won resoundingly.
So my last question would be about Mr. Robin is about how fragile is this ceasefire? Can we trust Pakistan to not allow terrorist infiltration into India? How is it going to pan out for India going forward? What should be India more careful about going forward?
Trusting Pakistan is like leaving an alcoholic in a bar. and trusting him not to drink. The fact of the matter is, Pakistan cannot be trusted. So long as Asim Munir is not in prison or on the gallows, then Pakistan cannot be trusted. And even if Pakistan is serious and realizes that they cannot win against India militarily, then Pakistan needs to show true and real reform. At the same time, if Pakistan does become sincere, there's always the danger of spoilers, of hardliners whose entire reason for existence, whose ideology, whose financial gain comes from the economics of terrorism. And they might lash out on their own, autonomously. Here, there's an analogy to what happened with Anwar Sadat in Egypt in 1977. You remember the Camp David Accords, when Anwar Sadat decided that he was going to fly to Jerusalem to make peace with Israel. Now, many people said Anwar Sadat was a peacemaker, and he was. But they forget that he only made peace once he tried war and realized that his defeat was so resounding that he could not achieve his aims that way. But what happened after that, after Anwar Sadat had that change of heart, was hardliners in 1981 assassinated him. So Pakistan is in a very tough situation. I'm not sure that Pakistan is sincere. But if they are sincere, India still needs to be on its guard because of the dynamics of the conflict and the dynamics of those in Pakistan who have gained for more than 50 years by being involved in terrorism and don't want to allow their cash cow to disappear.